Dr. Tony Evans had always been seen as one of the most respected pastors in America. His name carried weight not only in church circles, but also in millions of homes that heard his voice every week. People admired him for his sermons, his books, and the way he spoke about faith with power and passion. For years, his image stood strong, perfect, untouchable, and larger than life. But you won't believe what was quietly happening behind that image. Let me tell you, there were things no one saw, things that would later change how people looked at him forever. Behind the pulpit, while the world saw strength, his home was carrying the weight of quiet storms. For a long time, the Evans family stayed silent. They ignored the whispers, the rumors, and the questions that never seemed to stop. But this time was different. The silence finally broke when his wife spoke out. Her words didn't come from anger or scandal. They came from pain, honesty, and a need to show that even spiritual leaders live through struggles that no one talks about. This is how everything started to unfold. She said that people often saw Tony Evans as a man who never broke down, who never doubted, who always had an answer for everything. But the truth was far from that. She admitted that even in a family full of faith, there were moments of distance, arguments that left scars, and nights when they wondered if they could keep going. The public image of perfection never existed. "We are just like everyone else," she had said. "We face pressure, fear, and heartbreak." And this is where it gets interesting, because people expected her to defend his perfect image, but instead, she chose to show his humanity. But here is the shocking part. Her words didn't come from bitterness. They came from love, the kind that survives through cracks and struggles. She said Tony carried more pressure than anyone could imagine. When the lights of the church went out and the people went home, he often sat in silence, lost in thought, praying not just for others, but for himself. His wife said that sometimes she looked at him and saw not a leader, but a man trying to stay strong for everyone when he himself was breaking inside. The world expected him to always be perfect, and that expectation fell heavily, not just on him, but on his whole family. His children felt it, his wife felt it. Every mistake, every misunderstanding, every small family problem became something people talked about. The church loved him, but the shadow of that love also brought judgment. People expected the Evans family to be flawless, and when they weren't, whispers started again. What makes this story different? It's not about some dark secret. It's about the price a man and his family paid for being placed too high on a pedestal. She also opened up about how their marriage faced moments of deep struggle. There were days when she felt invisible, when ministry took so much of his time that she barely recognized the man she married. The same voice that preached hope to millions sometimes came home too tired to talk. She said she once thought about walking away, not because she stopped loving him, but because she couldn't carry the weight of being the pastor's wife anymore. The world saw her as strong, but inside she was tired. The craziest part was that even in those dark moments, she said faith never left their home, but it was tested again and again. They prayed through their arguments, cried after church services, and tried to keep smiling while the world watched. She said that faith didn't always fix everything. Sometimes it just gave them the strength to face another day. And in that truth, people began to see something real. Not a perfect pastor, but a family fighting to survive the expectations that came with his name. Every word she said peeled away the illusion the public had built for years. It made people realize that maybe what we all feared was true, that the Evans family wasn't perfect, but what no one expected was how much honesty would make their story even more powerful. Her confession didn't weaken Dr. Tony Evans' legacy. It made it human and somehow even stronger. After her words spread, people everywhere began to talk. Some were shocked, some were moved, and others didn't know what to believe. But before anyone could settle their thoughts, more of her story came forward, and you won't believe how much deeper it went. She spoke about the moment everything started to change for their family, the day when tragedy entered their home and shook everything they had built together. Let me tell you, this was not just another sad story. This was the beginning of their greatest test of faith. In 2019, Dr. Tony Evans lost his first wife, Lois, the woman who had stood beside him through decades of ministry. Her death wasn't just a personal loss, it was a blow to the entire church community. People cried, prayed, and tried to comfort him, but deep down, everyone wondered, could the man who had comforted millions now comfort himself? His wife later revealed that during those months, Tony was a different person. Behind the brave sermons and the calm voice, he was breaking piece by piece. This is how she described it. He would stand before thousands with strength, but when the doors closed, he would sit in silence, staring at her photo, whispering prayers only God could hear. But here's the shocking part. She said he often questioned if he could keep going. The world saw a preacher. She saw a grieving husband. There were nights when he couldn't sleep, when his hands trembled before writing his next sermon, when he begged God to show him how to move forward. She confessed that there were moments when even she wondered if he would ever be the same again. People thought his faith made him unshakable, but she revealed that it was his pain that made his faith real. And then came the part that truly caught everyone off guard. When Tony remarried, some people celebrated, believing God had given him another chance at happiness. Others whispered that it was too soon, that he was trying to fill a space that could never be filled. This is where it gets interesting, because the woman he married, the same one now speaking, didn't shy away from those whispers. She faced them head on. She admitted that marrying a man who was still grieving such a deep loss was never going to be easy. There were days, she said, when I questioned if I could ever step into the same story that once belonged to another woman. She knew she could never replace Lois. And destiny took an unexpected turn when she realized she wasn't meant to. Instead, she said she was there to walk with him into a new season, one that carried both joy and the shadow of memory. The pain of comparison was constant. Wherever they went, people looked at her and thought of Lois. Church members would smile politely, but their eyes carried quiet questions. Was she as kind, as wise, as perfect? It felt like I was living in someone else's story, she said softly. But still, she stayed. She stayed through the whispers, through the quiet judgment, and through the hard days when Tony struggled to balance his past and his present. The craziest part was that instead of running from the pain, she faced it with grace. She said there were moments when she wanted to walk away, to escape the weight of being compared to a woman the world still adored. But she didn't. I couldn't fill the space Lois left, she said. I was never meant to. I was meant to help him heal. And that simple truth changed everything. It was in that healing that their marriage slowly became something new, not a replacement, but a continuation of grace. Tony's sermons began to sound different, softer, more human. People said his words carried a kind of broken beauty, as if every sentence was shaped by both love and loss. His wife said she saw it too, the shift in his spirit, the deeper understanding in his voice. But even then, challenges didn't stop. Rumors began to grow again, this time about his health. People noticed that he was older now, slower, quieter. Some said he looked tired. Others feared something worse. And when his wife was asked about it, she didn't deny it. She told the truth, that yes, time had started to catch up with him. His body was aging, his energy was fading, and there had been health scares that left them both terrified. Yet, she also said something that gave people hope. He may not be the same man physically, she said, but his spirit has never been stronger. She said Tony would always repeat one thing: as long as God gives me breath, I'll keep preaching. What makes this story different? It's not about a man trying to hold on to fame or power. It's about a man holding on to purpose. Even when his body said, stop. In her words, people saw not weakness, but a deep kind of strength. She showed that behind every great preacher is a human being who cries, who fears, and who still chooses faith. And through her voice, the world began to see Tony Evans in a new light. After the truth about his health came out, the public's curiosity only grew stronger. People started asking what life really looked like inside the Evans household. They wanted to know if faith truly held them together, or if behind those church smiles, something deeper was breaking apart. And you won't believe what his wife shared next, because this was the part no one expected to hear. She said that the hardest part of their life together wasn't the grief or even the aging. It was the pressure that came with living under the constant eyes of people. Everyone thought being married to a pastor meant peace and perfection, she said, but sometimes it felt like we were living inside a glass house. Every argument, every mistake, every quiet moment of frustration felt like it had an audience. Let me tell you, she said it wasn't easy being part of a story that people thought they already knew. This is how she described it. Tony would give everything to the church. Every sermon, every meeting, every prayer request became part of his daily life. But the same energy that kept the church alive sometimes left the family drained. There were nights when he came home too tired to speak, when his children longed for his time, and when she sat alone, listening to the sound of an empty house, while knowing her husband was somewhere out there, saving souls. But here is the shocking part. She admitted there were times she resented the very thing that made him who he was. She loved his calling, but she hated how much it took from them. She said she used to sit in the front pew, smiling while he preached, but inside she would wonder, when will it be our turn to have him to ourselves? The church loved him so much that they didn't realize the family often had to share him with thousands. He didn't belong only to us, she said softly. He belonged to everyone. This is where it gets interesting. She confessed that the very gift God gave him also became the thing that almost tore them apart. People always said the Evans family was perfect, but she said behind those smiles were moments of deep loneliness. There were birthdays missed, anniversaries forgotten, and family dinners cut short because someone from the church needed him. Sometimes, as she said, the church won, and that left scars. The craziest part was that she wasn't angry when she said it, and she was honest. Her voice didn't carry blame. It carried truth. She said love and faith kept them going, even when they didn't know how to fix what fame and ministry had broken. And destiny took an unexpected turn when she realized something powerful. The life she once envied, the life of a respected pastor's wife, wasn't a fairy tale. It was a battlefield. She said there were nights when she prayed not for blessings, but for strength just to make it through another day without falling apart. She prayed to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel like more than just the woman standing beside the man everyone adored. I had to remind myself, she said, that God didn't call me to be perfect. He called me to be faithful. What makes this story different? It's not about drama or betrayal. It's about the truth that even the holiest homes face heartbreak. She said that sometimes people forget that pastors are humans, too. They bleed, they cry, they fail, and they try again. And the more she spoke, the more people began to understand that the Evans family wasn't an image. It was a story of survival. She told how faith became their glue. When anger and distance came between them, prayer brought them back together. When judgment from others felt unbearable, they reminded each other that grace was bigger than gossip. Her words weren't just confessions, they were lessons. Lessons about marriage, faith, and the cost of living in the spotlight. She said, the world looked at us and saw strength, but what they didn't see were the nights we both cried, the moments we doubted, and the times we asked God why this life had to be so hard. Her honesty didn't make people lose respect for Tony. It made them love him more. Because now, he wasn't just a preacher on a pedestal, He was a man who had walked through fire and still stood tall. By the time her words reached the public, something had changed. The whispers that once tried to pull their family down now turned into words of compassion. People began to realize that behind the sermons and the fame, there was a story of grace, loss, and redemption. The more she revealed, the more people listened, not because it was scandalous, but because it was real. As her words continued to spread, something unexpected happened. People who once gossiped about the Evans family started to see them differently. They no longer looked at them as the picture-perfect family from the church stage, but as real people who had survived storms that could have broken anyone. And you won't believe how her final confession changed everything. It was not just a story anymore. It was a lesson that touched hearts far beyond the walls of their church. She said that after everything, the grief, the pressure, the whispers, one truth became clear. Faith was never meant to make life easy. It was meant to keep them standing when everything else tried to knock them down. We feared people would judge us for not being perfect, she said. But what I learned is that people don't need perfection. They need honesty. Let me tell you, when she said that, the world stopped seeing her as just Tony Evans's wife. They saw her as a woman brave enough to speak truth in a world that worships appearances. This is how she brought her story to a close, with grace. She said the same ministry that once caused pain also became their healing. Tony began to preach each differently. His words carried the weight of a man who had lived through heartbreak, health scares, and judgment, yet still stood firm in his faith. She said that now, when he stepped onto the pulpit, his sermons weren't just about the promises of God. They were about the reality of walking through pain with him. But here is the shocking part. She admitted that Tony sometimes still struggled. There were days when he doubted his strength, when his body was tired, and when he wondered if he had done enough. But every time he reminded himself that his purpose was not finished yet. This is where it gets interesting. She said that the same people who once questioned him began to find comfort in his vulnerability. The man who once seemed unshakable was now teaching the world that being human didn't make your faith weak. It made it stronger. And the craziest part was how this truth started to spread beyond the church. People everywhere began to say that Tony Evans's story gave them courage to face their own imperfections. His wife's honesty had turned their family's pain into a message of hope. She looked back and said, "We used to think that showing weakness would make people lose faith in us. But now I know it's our weakness that shows the power of grace." Those words changed everything. The whispers that once carried doubt were now filled with respect. People realized that even the strongest believers walk through dark valleys, and that's what makes their light shine even brighter. Destiny took an unexpected turn when their story stopped being about a perfect pastor and became about a real man learning to trust God through brokenness. She said that Tony's life had become proof that faith isn't about never falling. It's about standing up every time you do. And through that, their marriage, once tested by pressure and loss, became stronger than ever. "We found peace," she said, "not the kind the world gives, but the kind that comes when you stop pretending and start being honest." What makes this story different? It didn't end with drama or scandal. It ended with truth, a truth that everyone could see themselves in. She said Tony Evans wasn't perfect, and he never tried to be. He was just a man who kept walking, kept preaching, and kept believing, even when his heart was heavy. And maybe that's why his legacy now feels even more powerful than before. In the end, her honesty did something no sermon could ever do. It reminded everyone that even spiritual giants have cracks, and through those cracks, light finds its way in. Tony Evans's wife didn't expose his weakness to shame him. She exposed it to show the strength that only comes through grace. Their story became a mirror, showing that faith is not about living without pain, but learning to live with hope in the middle of it. At 75, Tony still stood with the same conviction, but now his words carried something deeper. The sound of a man who had lived everything he preached. And perhaps that was the most powerful message of all. Because in the end, the truth people once feared, that the Evans family wasn't perfect, became the very reason their story inspired millions.